Hey there folks and friends, connecting the dots here. It's January the 18th, Fukushima Day 1045. Now before we jump into 1045, let me address a couple of comments here that were left on Fukushima Day 1044. I'm sorry if it's an inconvenience, but unfortunately I'm not registered with Google+, nor do I plan on doing it. I've uploaded a video a little while back about Google+ The Beast. I hope you check it out. And unfortunately I can't review some of the comments, so although it says 11 comments are there, many of your comments may not show up, and they're probably very informative comments. That's very sad. But nonetheless, here I'll address with what I do see, and it says here, when will the mass human die-off start? Well, unfortunately, Chris, it's already started here. There was a report published back in 2012 that mentioned that there's at least 14,000 U.S. infant deaths. Those are children under the age of 1 that died, unfortunately, soon after the Fukushima incident happened. So yeah, the die-off has already started. Okay, the next one comes from Ed Caddy. He says, I hear the government has raised the standard of how much you're allowed to ingest by hundreds of times. Actually, Ed, it's much higher than that, and I'll be addressing that a little later on in this video. Now, just below him says Dale Bergeron, Gulf spill was a hint. They did that then also. Actually, Dale, they didn't, because back then it wasn't radiation, it was actually oil mixed in with Corexit, which is owned by the Rothschild, with that secret ingredient that well, if you're subscribed to me back in 2008, you may have seen my videos on it. I couldn't find out what the secret ingredient was, but I know that Corexit was owned by a Rothschild industry. Regardless, what happened then, it was the restaurateurs, and I'll be showing that again in this video, the same thing. The restaurateurs stopped buying the Gulf oil spill, not Gulf oil spill, the Louisiana seafood. All the Gulf seafood was rejected by the restaurateurs, and great old Obama stepped in, and what did he do? He bought all of the seafood from the Gulf oil spill and gave it all to the armed forces. Great. Okay, next one down. Roscoe mentions here regarding the MOX fuel. Well, it's not 2 million times more, it's actually 10 to 20 times more, but nonetheless, yes, we have a big situation here at reactor number 3 also with that MOX fuel. Okay, so this is a story I posted yesterday regarding the Alaska salmon sample coming positive, testing positive for Fukushima radiation. Well, you may have noticed here at the end it says people don't trust the government and they don't trust corporations. It was exactly the same incident with the Gulf oil spill. Barack Obama was in power back then. I showed in his videos how his largest campaign donor was, guess who? BP Oil. So of course he was gone golfing in Hawaii when the Gulf oil spill incident took place, and you know, there wasn't very much that ever took place there on his part. You know, never changes. Well, actually it does change this time here, and I'll show that at the end of this video. He's done a lot worse this time around than with the Gulf oil spill. So basically, in the story regarding the Alaska salmon here, it says that of the 7 samples that were tested, 5 of them had no detectable levels of radionuclide. That doesn't mean they didn't have any. And 2 of the samples registered at trace levels. The Alaskan came in here with cesium-137, and the Alaska pink came in with cesium-134, which is definitely a clear fingerprint that it's Fukushima contamination. So Fukushima is spewing out cesium-137, but for them to isolate and make sure that it is Fukushima radiation, they need that 134. It's one of the key components here of elements here of Fukushima. You may have noticed here at the bottom where it says, after years of denial, TEPCO, you know, officials have finally came clean here, saying there was roughly 400 metric tons of radioactive water spewing every single day for the last 3 years. I'll be getting into that because it's so relevant to the contamination of the Pacific Ocean and the food chain. Okay, so again, just like with the Gulf oil spill, first it was the restaurateurs, you know, the government was telling everyone, no, the Gulf oil spill, the seafood is all right, there's nothing wrong with it, and in the end, there was something wrong with it, at least it never came out publicly, but, you know, we had, if you were following me back then, I made videos how they even had oil in certain seafoods that showed up at restaurants. Regardless, here again, we have the same story here in California, where a San Diego restaurateur says, no, he's removed all of this seafood, anything coming from San Diego all the way up to Alaska. So again, it's a recent story that just came out there, was put out January 15th, and you may have seen there that even though the scientists have said that the radiation in the ocean is now low. Perez, the chef there, says he isn't buying it. All the seafood from his restaurant is there's nothing there from San Diego all the way up to Alaska. So I'm sure that's going to catch on, this trend. When people get informed, usually people that eat healthy are the ones that are the most informed as to where their food is produced and what came in contact with it. So I'm sure it's going to catch on, folks. Okay, so in Fukushima Day 995, I showed here how there was a hidden government forecast contamination spread of the Northern Pacific Ocean. I'm going to play a little bit of that, and I want to get into some of it. Now, you may notice at the bottom here it says that in this study, he says we are concerned a long-term dispersion of 137, which I mentioned does come out of Fukushima, and the simulation only carries out to 2041. Now, something more important there. Hold on. So he goes on to say that, note that the ocean release used for this model appeared to end soon after March 2011. This means that the daily release of 400 tons of radioactive water has likely not been taken into account with this map, and I believe he's correct. Let me pause it here and make it a little bit bigger so you can capture the date and everything and see just how much this spreads. Okay, so I'd like to remind you, don't pay attention to the levels here on the edge. They have nothing to do with the intensity of the radiation. Like I mentioned, this is probably only taking into account the initial release. As you'll see here, the plume off the shores of Fukushima clearly dissipate as the years go by. You can notice at the top here, we're at 2011 in May. So here we go, we start off. And soon after, you can see how it already starts clearing up there. Look at right off the coast of Fukushima. You can see how it's clearing up. So this is only off that initial plume, and this is what they've found with their secret map. Let me fast forward a bit here so you can see where we end up with this. Okay, we're in year 2019. As I'd mentioned in my previous Fukushima Day 995, it travels into the Indian Ocean. It spreads. It's all about those ocean conveyor belts, how they're going to spread all of the radiation. Now, as you may notice here, as we progress on to the year 2024 here, how intense it is right along the west coast, and that's what really concerns me here. I'm very concerned about that. I live on British Columbia here, right on Vancouver Island. I'm surrounded by ocean. I mean, real estate, everything else is just going to collapse here with this spreading out. So keeping in mind here, this is just the initial release, and this is what the hidden map has already shown how far this is going to spread. So no matter where you are in the world, you'll see, you're going to get it, and I'll prove that here coming up. Some of you may recall that back in August 2013, we had another study that came out that showed that there was, in that study, there was going to be a prolonged exposure for California, especially the West Coast, the entire West Coast, lasting for at least 10 years. And again, with that study, the only problem was they did turn around and say, however, people on those coastlines should not be concerned as the concentration of radioactive materials quickly drops below World Health Organization safety levels as soon as it leaves the Japanese waters. Hold on, folks. We're not all swimming in that ocean, but we sure as heck are eating seafood from it. So if we're supposed to have at least a prolonged exposure on the west coast for 10 years, and they're already catching fish off the coast of Fukushima at 258 times above the safe level, just how high will the fish be here eventually off our coast? I'm willing to bet a lot higher than 258 times above their levels. And if you're all wondering, how did the fish ever get so radioactive? Well, guess what? Same old, same old. Study found up to 47 quadrillion becquerels of cesium-137 released into Pacific from Fukushima. Nearly 50 times the original TEPCO estimate. It's always an estimate, so they give themselves lots of room for error. Regardless of the error, eventually they come clean, folks. It takes a lot of time, but we do know now at least, it's come out first. It was 300 tons of highly radioactive water. Now it's up to 400 tons of highly radioactive water going into the Pacific Ocean every single day. This is a crisis. So is it 300 tons, 400 tons, or 600 tons? How much is going into the Pacific Ocean every day? We don't know. It's only guesstimate. These people never, ever come clean on the entire story. But here's what we do know. They've admitted there's 400 tons of this water that's leaking down from the mountains. It's going right into the plants, and it's mixing up with apparently the 300 tons that they're pouring into reactor 1, 2, and 3 to keep them cool. So they're pouring 300 tons, and there's now apparently another 400 tons. So what's the total number leaking into the ocean? Nobody really knows. But what we do know is that just 2 weeks later, it was reported on August 2013 that the contamination was now spiking in the seawater off the Fukushima plant, an 18-fold increase in just 1 week. And we do know that every time there's any disaster, these companies always downplay the situation, and once again, they're playing with our lives. This time, radiation roulette, folks. Again, just September 27th, a month later, it's up front. 400 tons, 100 tons more than what TEPCO had claimed. It never changes. Okay, so if you haven't got it by now, this is all about the Great Ocean Conveyor Belt and how it's going to be spreading everything around the ocean. So if it's not at your doorstep now, get ready. This is an ongoing leak. They're talking about 35 to 45 to 55 years before they get it contained. You've already seen the numbers here. Get ready, folks. Brace yourself. Get informed. It's not the end of the world. We can deal with it. Your first step will be understanding the food chain and how everything that we dump in the ocean ends up at the top of the food chain, which means in your belly. And I guess many of you are already probably aware that there's already a certain limitation on the amount of tuna you can already eat out of the ocean due to the mercury levels. Well, I think it's going to get a lot worse with the Fukushima. If folks are a little worried about the mercury, I think it'll be a lot more concerned about radiation. Okay, moving along here. So basically the term bioaccumulation means that all these little fish that go around foraging for all kinds of crabs and shrimp and whatever else is swimming around here, even the waterfowls, they eat all this smaller crustaceans and whatnot. The fact is, this all bioaccumulates in these fish, and they get eaten by bigger fish, which concentrates the levels of radiation even more. So the bigger the fish is, the more radioactive he will be eventually. And the same thing will go, we're not alone at the top of the food chain. We have whales here, dolphins, eagles, many of these other birds. Will be concentrating the levels of radiation and also bringing it inland. I have to make a video on that someday because I've thought about this before, how the grizzlies and the eagles will be carrying in the salmon, which will be loaded with radiation. Eventually, it's going to be all over the place. Even the amount of mist coming off the ocean has been tracked to go in as far as 300 miles inland. I'm not saying that happens everywhere, but it's, especially in the hot areas. So we're going to have a situation here where even radiation may be floating in the atmosphere due to ocean mist. Okay, and like I said, with the conveyor belt here, it's going to spread everywhere. So if it's not at your doorstep now, get prepared, get informed, or subscribe. I guess that's your other option. Okay, now to make things worse, some of you may recall that shortly after the meltdown, we had many countries raise the acceptable level of radiation in their food and their water. I've made a couple of videos on it myself. How convenient, just as there's a meltdown, before everything elevates in radiation, they end up changing the acceptable level. So what wasn't acceptable on Monday suddenly becomes acceptable on Tuesday. That's a whole lot of you-know-what. And I made a video myself called Obama Willing to Kill 1 in 23 Americans by Cancer. The story was that he changed the acceptable level of cancer death rates after drinking U.S. water for 30 years. It used to be 1 in 10,000 Americans. He raised it, the acceptable level, to 1 in 23 Americans after drinking water for 30 years. So if you're 60 years old, you've just doubled doubled your chances of dying of radiation. It's unbelievable here what's going down. And it gets worse. Hold on. So like I was saying, it gets worse. It says here, University of Berkeley, of California and Berkeley, they were talking about in their forum, the new standards will result in nearly a 1,000-fold increase for exposure to strontium-90, 3,000 to 100,000-fold hike for exposure to iodine-131, and almost 25,000 rise for exposure to radioactive nickel-63. Like I said, yeah, how convenient. Yeah, they make it so convenient that even when the reactors start aging, they just loosen up the safety rules. Unbelievable. And this is even after an ex-regulator from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission came out and said that all 104 U.S. nuclear plants are flawed. Take care, folks. Share the info.
You cannot filter it out. It is in you. You are listening. Like when the voice inside your head says something, you are listening. It's not even a choice because it's inside, right? And it's kind of trippy.